Myself, I'm Dr. Srinivas. I'm an andrologist and urologist. Let me introduce myself because this will be the first class for this batch. So, basically, after urology, I have done a fellowship in andrology. This was from Rajiv Gandhi University. Okay, and now I'm confined only to andrology. So, andrology has two aspects. One we relate to the fertility. The other one is sexual medicine, that is related to erectile dysfunction and so on. So during in this course, I will take both the thing, but the more emphasis will be on the fertility aspect. Okay. So let us start with the basic thing, that is the pathophysiology, the anatomy of the male reproductive system. All of you are gynecologists or a mix are also there?
Gynecologist only, sir.
Okay. And anyone can also interrupt in between and you can ask questions. It's nothing like you have to wait till the end of the session in between, because you may not remember and it's difficult to correlate once I progress from that topic. So in between you can ask questions. Okay, it will be just like a very casual recap because you would have studied all this. It's a basic MBBS thing with all just a recap of all those things, but this will be more linked towards the practice what we are doing. So what are the important things which we have to concentrate on? Though only those anatomical parts will be explained. Okay. So now the objective will be a briefing about the anatomy and physiology of the reproductive system, particularly pertaining to the male, and related pathological condition is what we will now discuss on. So basically, a male reproductive system confines to both the testicles. Basic thing is male testis. Rest of the system surrounding it is just for the channel and also the higher mental centers, which will give the hormones, which will produce the hormones, and that will manipulate the testis to secrete. So it is like a factory. Now the testis is a factory, but you have to have workers, you have to have products, then only raw materials and so on, then only you get a output after that. So the main thing is testis, which is a factory, and rest of the things slowly we'll know what are the other things, how they are correlated and how they function. Okay, so this testis produces the sperm, as well as the other function of testis is production of hormones. Two functions basically. So the center of the testis, the main center of the testis produces hormone, and periphery of the testis produces these sperms. Now, in a case of a small testis, a person having small testis, the chances that the sperm production, that is the periphery, are less, but the center will be there. So when you do hormone evaluation, it may be normal sometimes. I'm not saying it will be, it may be normal, but when it reduces, it's the reduction happens in the whole. So there will be derangement in these hormones. That's how we identify and find out whether it is a primary testicular failure or whether there is some other system involved in creating the problem within the reproduction. Okay, this is to say that the problem can be within the testis, it can be at higher mental center, it can be in the channel, that is in the epididymis, vas deferens, or urethra, or wherever the channel, the flow of the sperm happens. So anyway, so related, so I want to classify, this is my, for my understanding, I do a classification of this reproductive system into three categories. One, I call it as pre-testis, second is testis, and then post-testis. If you classify this under three headings, then you know what to do, when to do. This is basically for the treatment sake. There's no textbook which gives these things. This is for you to understand, and also what type of treatment to give them, what are the prognosis. So I classify into pre-testis, testis, and post-testis. Pre-testis is all related to the hormones. So if anterior pituitary secretions are not happening properly, and that causes a decreased hormone production and a decreased signal to the testis, and so sperm production may not happen. Okay, so that is pre-testis. Testis is within the problem within the testis, that is primary testicular failure or even secondary also, but the problem exists within the testis. And post testis includes after the testis, means the testis is normal, the pre-testis cause also is normal, so sperm production is happening but it is not coming out, that is in the channel. So where is the problem? If we identify into three groups, then we can make out what to do, what treatment can be given, and what is the prognosis. So now I will concentrate on post testis. Okay, after the testis, first is the testis, then the covering is.
Doubt, sir.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Sir, by history and clinical examination, we will come to know anything about pre-testis or testis or post-testis. Only with testis we can find out, no, sir?
See, history is only to find out what can be a cause. Let us say they are exposed to some toxigenic agents or a history of say many mumps. So it is not, you can't divide this into pre-testis, testis and post-testis. This is only for
no,
treatment.
sir. First, sir, if any abnormal semen report comes,
that is one.
when abnormal semen report comes, then
absolutely.
first is
so
clinical examination and history we can come to some idea about the testes only, no, sir. But investigation only we can go for.
See, yes, whatever the history is there, after that the examination will show that the testis is small and the consistency is soft. So then you know it is a case of a primary testicular failure. Yeah,
please tell them. See, we have the basics.
Yes, it's the first class. Yes.
Whatever you're speaking, those should be
related to the topic. See, the thing is, I am going to take the next class. This is related to pathophysiology. When I come to clinical management, there is a class for clinical management. At that point, this is all coming.
Okay, sir.
Where I take case basis. So now I'm just giving you a clinical orientation to understand this pathophysiology, to apply that into clinical, so that I'm going in that direction.
Okay.
You understood? See, I don't want to tell like a text.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If I say reproductive system,
understood, sir. Thank you, sir.
There, so what will I am putting clinical divisions
and the class interesting, sir.
Okay. No, it's okay. Sir. You put on your doubts, but the doubts will be cleared. But it's just a starting. This is only for related to the basic things. In the next class, I'm coming to the clinical evaluation. Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, anything related to anatomy, related to this slide or understanding, please tell me, no problem. Okay. So after the testis, you get the scrotum. Then next, the channel is the very next to the testis comes. First comes the collecting area, that is rete testis. And after rete testis, epididymis comes. But I want to tell you some more detail about the testis. See, testis is made of millions of seminiferous tubules. So that's why we get millions of sperms. Now, when we have millions of sperms, now where all they get connected? They all get connected at one point called rete testis. So these all channels, see, there are two aspects. One is an endocrine function, exocrine function. Testis has both. It's an organ which has both. Endocrine is all these secretions of testosterone and FSH, whatever the hormones is secreted. Exocrine means a duct will be there. So the sperm is secreted into the duct. So it needs a channel. I think this basic understanding you would have known. That is exocrine versus endocrine. So this is an exocrine function. The sperm needs a channel. It starts with the testis and goes up to the rete testis, is the collecting point of all these millions of seminiferous tubules. It's a tubule. The production happens within the tubule. And from the tubule, when it is mature, it gets detached and comes through the tubule into the rete testis. Okay. Now, why I'm stressing on this is, next, when we go into clinical aspect, into obstructive azoospermia, that is where we have to extract and where there is a chance of block. All this understanding is very much required. So you can, that's why I'm telling now itself that rete testis is one of the most important point where you can extract sperm, because it is the common point where all the seminiferous tubules come together. Okay, and from there what happens, it goes into epididymis. The first is a dilated part called as the head of the epididymis, and you can see in the diagram the epididymis starts from the superior aspect, goes laterally and goes behind the testis and comes till the inferior aspect. So this entire thing is an epididymis. Now this is called caput or head of the epididymis. Then this is the body, and once it becomes smaller, then we call it tail. Okay, so what you can feel in clinical examination is the head. Sometimes you can feel the body, but whatever you feel suddenly above the testis is the head of the epididymis. Now, as per the diagram, you can see the epididymis is roughly, can anyone guess how much is the length of the epididymis? Just, you can see testis is 4 to 5 centimeter in length. So slightly more than that is what we can.
5 centimeters.
But if I say epididymis is 60 meters long, will you believe?
My God.
It is coiled on itself. It's a thin, very thin tube which is coiled within itself. Whatever you are seeing outside is just a covering of the epididymis with a tunica. Tunica vaginalis covers the epididymis. It's a small tubule which is coiled on itself. Up
6
and down,
meters.
up and down.
6 meters in that.
Yeah. So the entire thing goes up and down. The major thing is within the head. So when this head, the collection within the head and the coiling is more in the head, that means the stasis of sperm within the head is for a longer time. So the maturation happens usually within the head of the epididymis, because the sperm gets detached within the the seminiferous tubules, comes into the epididymis, and it has to travel that length, 6 meters approximately. So when it travels, it needs time. It takes a longer time. That is where maturation happens. So what is the difference in this? Why I'm explaining this is PISA sample are mostly mature sperms. And when we take from the testis, the chances that we get mature sperms are less. So you can still get a mature sperm because it would have detached from the seminiferous tubules, come into the rete testis where you could have taken it out. So you will get a mature sperm. And during, let us say, when we aspirate out during the procedure, you will see some twitching within the sperms, even in TISA sample. So that means it is already mature. It's on the verge of movement. And majority, all the time, TISA samples, majority time, it is highly motile because it's already fertilized, I mean, matured up fully. So this is again a basic difference. So what you would prefer, whether it is a PISA sample or TISA sample, which is more preferable? Obviously PISA, but it depends on case to case, because there is something called tunica albuginea, which I did not tell. Covering of testis is tunica albuginea. This tunica albuginea is very, very tough layer, and it forms what is called a blood testis barrier. Okay, so what happens? The blood within our body is cannot enter this. So any infection like tuberculosis, chronic, whatever inflammations can never transfer towards the testis, inside the testis. It can go, it can involve the epididymis. Even in tuberculosis, epididymal orchitis is very less. Epididymitis is more common. It involves the epididymis, but it cannot enter inside the testis. It may surround it, but the tunica is so thick. In fact, there is a saying that even if an elephant stamps on this, the rupture of that is not going to happen. So it is that tough layer. So what I want to say here is that blood testis barrier is very important. The production of anti-sperm antibodies cannot enter there. Infection cannot enter that. So when you want in certain conditions, let us say there is a high ROS. ROS means reactive oxygen species. Maybe I'm using certain terms which should have been used later, because these may be a little highly complicated, but these are the terms which we need to use it, and I'll be telling about this as the classes goes on. In these conditions, I will prefer TISA sample. The reason is I want a better sperm which is not exposed to ROS or to the infection in certain conditions. Then I go directly for TISA. So the answer cannot be PISA or TISA. It depends on the case. Okay, but preferably given a case which we don't know, and idiopathic, what we call 60% of the case is idiopathic, I'll still go for PISA because I want a mature sperm. Okay. So what happens after the epididymis tail? After the tail, it continues to call what is called as vas difference or ductus difference. Vas difference is approximately 20 centimeter in length. Okay, it starts from the tail of the epididymis and it enters the prostate here. This is a common ejaculatory duct. It enters the ejaculatory duct which is within the prostate. Okay, now there are from both the testes, that is on the left and the right, they join at the common ejaculatory duct. You can see here in the diagram there are two things. So one is left and other one is right. Both combine together within the prostate to form the common ejaculatory duct. So till there it is separate. Left is separate, right is separate. Again, what is the importance of this? Again, I will tell it in due courses that whenever there is a block within this common ejaculatory duct, then we can resect the prostate and then we can give a permanent cure for the patient. So this anatomy again is very important, that both sides join together within the prostate to form common ejaculatory duct. Okay, and then this common ejaculatory duct is about maximum 1 to 2 centimeter only, depends again the prostate size, the prostate length, and that goes and joins the urethra which comes from the bladder. Now again here also it's very important to understand the anatomy. Why? Because all we know that it joins here as a common ejaculatory duct and the sperm comes this and goes through urethra, isn't it? Now it has this tract also, urethra. Now isn't it possible for the sperm to go back like this? Why it has to come only in this direction? When there is a channel, let us say you are only driving and there are two roads, how will you know which to take? Isn't it? So this is called retrograde ejaculation. So there are two conditions where
sympathetic system that stimulates the contraction of the internal urethra.
Yes. No. That is about the ejaculation. The retrograde happens because of the sphincter. That is the sphincter which is controlling the urine passage, the bladder at the bladder level, neck level. When they are damaged, this opens up. That's when the retrograde ejaculation happens. Okay. The internal muscle contraction is because of the ejaculation. It happens is to propel the sperm from the posterior urethra to anterior urethra. That is exactly correct. But when it propels, when it pumps, no, it can go back also. It cannot go back only because when this is closed. So when there is a door closed, it will go to the, and then there it's like only one channel. Then the propulsion happens. Okay. So
it goes back because of sphincter.
Yeah, sphincter is closed.
So it will come.
Then there is no channel to go back because it's just within the process.
Damage to the sphincter can cause.
Any damage to the sphincter, diabetes can cause diabetic patients.
Yeah.
See, diabetic patients, the bladder neck is formed of alpha receptors which are damaged, but that does not mean they leak urine. Why they don't leak urine is there are two things. One is bladder neck, and there is a sphincter here also. So they can control both sides. If this is damaged, still there will be no leakage because the external sphincter is there. Okay, let us say when we resect the prostate, it's very difficult. Sometimes we may damage the internal sphincter, but still there will be no leakage of urine because there are two systems. So the external sphincter controls it, but it cannot prevent the reflux of the sperm into the baby bladder. So let us say a patient with history of prostatic surgery or a diabetic patient, the chances that they can have a retrograde ejaculation is very high. Okay, a patient usually with retrograde ejaculation comes to you and says, I am getting the ejaculate. I know it is coming, but nothing is coming out. One. Second, he says the volume is always constantly less. So when there is a retrograde, antegrade also happens to some extent. So what happens is usually sperm goes from a high pressure area to a low pressure area. That is sperm or water or anywhere in the system. It's always from high pressure to low pressure. So this length is very small compared to the entire urethra. Urethra is about 22 to 24 centimeter length. So the pressure there, the channel is more. So the pressure is high within this urethra. That is the urethral from urethra till the posterior urethra. That is the anterior to from the bulb to the posterior urethra. The length is 22 and it is of a uniform diameter. So the pressure will be the same. What happens here is the prostate is very small, maybe 2 centimeter, and then there is a way given up. Bladder can, how much urine one can have? Half liter, even sometimes 1 liter. Diabetic patient can have more, can hold up to 1 liter of urine. So the pressure within the bladder is less because it is a reservoir where the urine are holding. So usually it goes back rather than going front. But still, little sperm can still come in front. Now, one of the treatment, why I'm saying all this is, one of the treatment I give to my patient is have your bladder full so that it is very full and you have urgency. At that time, you ejaculate. What happens? The bladder is already filled, so there is no space. And that time when it ejaculates, because of the high pressure in the bladder, the sperms will come forward. And that time I have checked. I have done this, and sperms are more in quantity. Of course, we can't totally say everything will come outside, but definitely the quantity will be higher. So let us say a normal person is there, he has a retrograde ejaculation. You can do this filling and they will come to the level of IUI. So which can be still done, no need of any medications. Yes, what I give is alpha receptor are there. So alpha agonist can be given to make the contraction of the bladder neck. Okay, but still there are other things they can go for because there will be more contracture, the urine passage will become difficult for them. So you have to tell them there is chance that they may not pass urine at all. Then you have to catheterize them. So all these are there. So when we treat such patients, we have to have a caution. Okay. Is it very simple or you are feeling more complicated?
No, so it's very simple.
Yeah. So next, when this sperms comes out, we need a channel where there can be storage. Let us say a person is not ejaculated for months, so it can get stored. So what happens when this vas difference comes into the prostate is it has another opening called seminal vesicles. Seminal vesicles are reservoir for the sperms where it can store there. This is nature's mechanism to make it stored when they don't use it. So up to, even I have seen few going up to half a liter. So much dilatation and holding can happen within the seminal vesicles. But usually those who ejaculate every 3 days, it may be even masturbation, need not be always sex, the seminal vesicles will be contracted most of the time. Only in cases of some pathological conditions like an obstruction, there can be stone within this passage where the common ejaculatory ducts join with the seminal vesicles. That time it will be like one balloon, so which can be easily found in the scanning. So I don't want to stress on this because seminal vesicle is an organ which we will not touch. Though it is a reservoir, I am not going to touch is because very important organs are surrounding the seminal vesicles and it's not easy to reach there. You have to go through rectum only because it is next to the rectum and exactly enter the seminal vesicles. You can't get another track from this side, anterior aspect, only through rectum. Let us say you want sperm through the rectum, it will be contaminated. So we don't usually go this route. And usually when there is a collection within the seminal vesicles, that means there will be sperm within the testes and epididymis. So which gives a better option rather than going into seminal vesicles. So far, it is only as a diagnostic tool, which will tell me what could be the reason. If the seminal vesicle is dilated, that means indirectly there is sperm production, somewhere obstruction is there. It's just an indirect way. But you are not going to use a seminal vesicle collection. Okay. So the last part within the channel is the prostate. The prostate is very important here. Is about 50% of the secretion comes from the prostate. Why is prostate secretion important? Seminal vesicle is actually the most secretions which is given to the semen sample. Almost 65% is from the seminal vesicle. And another importance is seminal vesicle secretions are alkaline. Okay. Now, prostatic secretions are acidic. Okay. But seminal vesicle volume is more than prostatic secretions. So overall, the semen is a alkaline sample. All right. Very important. Why? Because seeing the pH, you can say where is the problem. If a patient is having a acidic pH in the semen, then it can be an infection in the prostate. Prostatitis has to be suspected. And if it is more alkaline, then you can think of seminal vesicleitis. The other thing is obstruction. Okay, seminal vesicles secretes what is called fructose. So when there is an obstruction there, the fructose will be absent in the sample. So whenever there is a absence of fructose, that means there is an obstruction in this system, that is the common ejaculatory duct. This is the common ejaculator where the seminal vesicles opens. So just a simple test, semen analysis saying fructose negative, your diagnosis is almost done. It's an obstruction at the
Seminal vesicle.
Seminal vesicle, or there can be another condition, what is called as CBAVD, that is congenital absence of vas deferens, both sides. Okay. In this also, what happens is total entire vas deferens, both sides are absent. So what happens here is the channel, the common ejaculatory duct is not at all formed because the vas is not there. Though the seminal vesicles are present, but there is nothing for it, there's no channel for it to put it. So the fructose is absent in this. Okay. So these are the clinical important things, but basically you have understood the anatomy, isn't it? And how we correlate, and when we take into clinical picture, what we have to study, his channel is very important. Obstruction is at what level and what has to be done. So my classification, if I say testis, pre-testis, post-testis. Post-testis is what we have studied now. Post-testis means anything after the testis, there is an obstruction in the channel. You can always retract the sperm just after the testis. Because up to the testis level, everything is normal. Everything is normal. So even if you go maximum in the epididymis, you can extract the sperm. Even if you go in the retate testis, you can extract the sperm. If there is an obstruction within the epididymis, most of the time since it is a highly coiled tubule here, usually you get in the head of the sperm, head of the epididymis. The reason being it's a huge coil, and any small obstruction at one point, there will be a crossover, and so usually you will get sperm in the head of the epididymis. Okay. I will go to the next, that is the pre-testis. Okay, this is channel is clear. Okay, so now coming to the pre-testis level, that is the higher mental function involved with the spermatogenesis. So I think even in the female tract, and this is both are the same. It doesn't make much difference. The same as that. Here it is only in the production of the sperm. So how it does is, from the higher mental center, that is the hypothalamus, from there the signal comes to the anterior pituitary. Okay, inhibitory as well as stimulatory. Most of the thing is within this. Main thing is anterior pituitary secretions. All are dependent on the anterior pituitary secretions. So anterior pituitary has two secretions, that is FSH and LH. Okay, so these two are very important for you to understand and also to tell what is the patient suffering from. So whenever we do analysis, hormone analysis is also very important. So after semen analysis, and then you know any pathology, whatever it may be, oligo, azo, FSH and LH is the main thing what is required. Okay, testosterone is may not be required. Why? Because it is not a secretion from anterior pituitary, it is from the testis, but it tells me about the function of the testis. But if you really ask what is really one test, which hormone test which is required, means if it is, then it is FSH only. Okay. Now, what does the FSH do? From the anterior pituitary, FSH is secreted, and this acts on the Sertoli cells. Now, what are Sertoli cells? They are the like guardians for the testis, means they are nourishing cells of the testis. So that nourishes the germ cells, which are the germ cells. Each germ cells will become into a sperm, mature sperm. Now, only when Sertoli cells are there, the sperm gets its structure, maturation, and final outcome comes only when there is a nurturing. That is like the Sertoli cells will make it possible for the sperm entire production. Though the germ cells may be there, it will be in the round shape germ cells. But for that to have its structure of a sperm and to get its whatever architecture, the Sertoli cells secretions is must. Now, so that is FSH. Now, when there is high FSH, there should be something that the Sertoli cells needs to give a negative feedback to make it into control. That is inhibin. Okay, please understand this. This is also very important. Whenever there is extra sperms, when there is extra FSH more, then the Sertoli cells secretes what is called inhibin, which acts on the anterior pituitary and stops the production of FSH. Okay, this is very important. So I'm asking this for you to find out or to understand what happens. What do you in a clinical stage? Let us say a person is having azoospermia. If you get a high inhibin is very high, what do you infer with this? Just think over that, because I want you to understand this cycle, feedback mechanism. What is your inference? If there is high inhibin level, I need you to think. So just say there is only two things: good prognosis, bad prognosis. Which is it? High inhibin.
Good. It is a good prognosis.
Why?
Because it in turn it decreases the FSH, so that it will maintain the it's so that
It decreases means you don't
stop
want
producing
you are decreasing the production, no? With high FSH. High FSH means more production. See, I am bringing, this is a normal anatomy or normal physiology. I am bringing you a case with 0 sperms. In that high inhibin is there.
Decreased FSH production.
FSH production is high. That means more sperm will be produced. Inhibin production is high means?
FSH is less.
So good or bad?
Bad.
Changing the answer. Okay. Why I brought this is to make you understand. Now, what we discuss is correct related to normal physiology. But this is a pathological physiology. Means there is a defect. There is a patient who does not have any sperm. So he has no sperm. We already know there is no sperm. Now, how much ever FSH is given, sperm production is 0. You understood? So when inhibin is high, what does it infer? When there is sperm, only inhibin will be high. When there is no sperm, will the Sertoli cell say anything? It will not say. It will not give any signal. So if there is sperm, then only inhibin says, okay, enough. There is sperm, enough. You don't secrete FSH. So if the inhibin is high, I am sure that there is somewhere there is sperm. Okay. Let us take the opposites. Inhibin is low. Okay. Inhibin is low means the sperm is absent. That's why there is no production of inhibin happening. Because it wants more FSH, it is signaling that I need more because there is no sperm. No. Don't think about all those things. This is only related to prognosis. We will come to what has happened is only after all the investigations. I want you to prognosticate whether sperm is there or not. Why means, I'll tell you why. I am going for a surgery. I am going and taking out the sperm. That I should know whether I will get sperm or not. Let us say we do a needle aspiration within the testis. If the inhibin is high, I am sure that somewhere there is sperm. I'll remove the testis, little bit tissue. If the embryologist says there is no sperm, I will still go again search, keep on searching because I know there is sperm. Because inhibin is high. Second scenario, inhibin is low. I'll go remove the testis, little bit. Embryologist says no sperm. I pack it. Yeah, you send it for histopathology, I pack it. So it will decide me what type of surgery I need to do. Understood? So if inhibin is high, I have to keep on searching till I get it. It will say, okay, not this side, it may be on the other side. See, spermatogenesis can happen focally also. In one point, it may be there. Few cells may be bad, few cells are good. Somewhere in the superior aspect, sperms may be produced. Somewhere in the inferior, it may be the. Where do you know? How do you know where it is being produced? So we need this inhibin value, hormone value to guide you. So what we do is a random biopsies. When the inhibin is high, I do first up, then go down, then go side. Whether here it is there it is there, I have to do multiple areas. So I have to map it out. So it will decide my surgery. Okay. Why this is very important is in case of azoospermia, you have to tell the patient before taking into OT. See, there is some chances and we will have to do it and then check it. But I have to prepare them for what? If the chances are less, I will tell in the forehand only. See, inhibin is low. The chances that we get is very less. Still, for the sake of showing it, I'll take a biopsy and that will tell me what problem you have. Okay. If inhibin is high, I'm sure there somewhere it is there, then I have to keep on doing. I will have to tell, see, it will be a more aggressive surgery. I may have to do micro TISA. Then the time of duration is long, the trauma will be more. So all this counseling can happen even before the surgery. So it will guide me my surgery. Okay. Prognosis is always good when the inhibin is high. But this is what we speak is a normal physiology. Indirectly, we have to put it into pathological condition. Okay. The same thing happens the other side, that is the Leydig cells. Leydig cells, Sertoli cells are nurturing, which are in the outside in the tract. Leydig cells are next to the germ cells. Let us say germ cell is there, next Leydig cell is there, then again a germ, and like that. It will be next to it. And these cells, when the anterior pituitary secretes the LH, it secretes testosterone. Now, please understand, testosterone is the hormone which goes for sperm production. If there is no testosterone, sperm production will not happen at all. But where is this testosterone? It is from the Leydig cell only, not an external testosterone. Testosterone tablets are there, injections are there. Majority of the gynecologist or even a general physician do this mistake. They evaluate, they check the testosterone level is less, they will give off the supplement, thinking that it will be normal level and sperm production will happen. Never. It will do the opposite work. Whenever there's a less testosterone, that means the production or the function of Leydig cell is less. So what you have to do, it's not, you don't have to supplement with testosterone, you have to give LH. You have to give more of LH to make the Leydig cell work. So you have to give what is we give is HCG injections, and indirectly that will make more of LH. Indirectly that will create more testosterone production and then more sperm. This is the way we have to think. But everyone tries to do a shortcut and give testosterone. External testosterone comes, the signal will be negative. See, that's why very important. Leydig cell, see the action of testosterone on Leydig cell is a negative. So what happens when you give an external testosterone, immediately this is switched off. The negative signal goes off, production of LH comes down. Production of LH and FSH both. So sperm production goes down. So if you give testosterone, there is less production of sperm, and it is one of the contraceptive pill which we use for male. So if you give testosterone, they will go for azoospermia. So you understood this mechanism, no? Any doubts in this? We'll go further. Okay, this semen pathway I have already explained. I will not again go into the detail. See, it's the production is happening within the seminiferous tubules and goes into rete-testis, then into the epididymis, and then into vas deferens, seminal vesicle collection, comes into common ejaculatory duct, and from there it comes to the urethra. Okay, so pathology anywhere can cause this. So yeah, a quick thing about the semen volume. Okay. But usually the volume is 2 to 5 ml. Okay. In this, the major 70%, 65 to 70% of the secretion is from the seminal vesicle, and the next is from the prostatic secretions. I already explained you about the value of pH on this. So depending on that, you will know where is the problem if in any pathological semen sample. Okay, and accordingly you can attend to that. Okay, it is the testis secretion is only about 10%. Okay, and usually, just for the thing for you to understand that testis secretion is the first secretion. So first secretion comes from the testis, then comes through the vas deferens, whatever it is there like this, then the seminal vesicle, then last is the prostatic secretion. Now, why these secretions are important? Prostatic secretions are acidic. It prevents any infection happening to the sample. So it is just a protective. Acidic are more protective. Seminal vesicles are alkaline because sperm requires an alkaline environment. Okay. The same within the female tract also. Right. Now, I'll just brief about anatomy. Very important, even in when we go into anatomy, I'm just putting those which are very important. Majority of the males suffer from varicocele. You might have already heard. So a brief note on this pampinifrine plexus, it's nothing but a vein surrounding the testicles, dilated, and it all goes to the superficial inguinal ring. Okay. So what is the importance of that is these channels are interlinked. That is what has to see here. Can you see both the sides? So there is an interlink of these veins. So a varicocele on right side does not mean that left side is normal. Okay. Many a times they do this mistake. When there is a one-sided varicocele, they just operate on one side, and then they will find out later it will, because this channel is still open. So the reflex, when you block this side, it will obviously go to this side, and that's how unilateral will not yield any improvement usually. So you have to always see varicocele as a bilateral pathology. It just says that unilateral varicocele, let us say I say left side testis, varicose is more, means that it has taken the brunt. Okay. So once I block the left side, it goes into the right side. Okay. Okay. All this is not much important, though maybe from exam point it is there, but clinically not much of an improvement. Importance required for this. Anatomy of the penis has two cavernosa, corpus cavernosa, and one corpus spongiosum. The urethra comes in the spongiosum. Okay. This is all filled of all sinusoids. The blood, this is the artery, the arterial supply to the penis, and from this the blood is flown into the sinuses where it is filled up, and that's how erection happens. Okay. And then arterial supply is by internal pudendal artery, which we saw in the cross section. Okay. And this is not much important. This is about the erection point only, not related to sperm production. Okay. Erection is always required for a natural normal reproduction. Most of them gets confused. Why? Because is erection required for ejaculation? Not always required. Okay. They can still ejaculate without getting erection. Both the mechanisms are different. You need an erection is a prerequisite. It happens after the erection that the ejaculation goes into the peak. But a person without erection can still ejaculate. Most of the people, they think erection is a must for their ejaculation. That's why psychologically they are down and they will not be able to ejaculate. So treatment for erection will give an ejaculate, but that is a placebo effect. It's not a scientific method of treatment. So when a person has he says, I am unable to give the sample, you can always give tablets for the erection, because if he sees an erection building up, he will think, okay, it's working and I will ejaculate. He gets a psychological well-being, and that is a placebo effect, and he will be able to ejaculate. But actually it's not required. Okay. Ejaculation process is different, erection process is different, but erection process comes first and then the final stage is ejaculation. Erection is a process for a natural reproduction to happen so that the penis enters into the female trach. Okay. And that can last as long as they are doing the intercourse. It may be 5 minutes, it may be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, depend on how much intercourse they are doing regularly. Few people will ejaculate very quickly, it's called premature ejaculation. But when does the ejaculation happens is at the peak of erection or peak of intercourse. When that peak reaches, erection is a mechanism of sympathetic system, ejaculation is parasympathetic. No, sorry, it's opposite. Parasympathetic is for erection and sympathetic is for ejaculation. Okay, so the system is different. So at the peak of the sympathetic supply, the trigger happens and then the ejaculation process happens. Okay. Now drainage of these veins are also like surrounding all the carpus, the sinusoid, it's got into the dorsal, deep dorsal vein, and then goes back into the, this is the pampiniform plexus. Okay, it goes back again to the pampiniform plexus only. All gets united at this point. From the scrotum, it goes, and both are joined here. So here also deep dorsal vein, just like dorsal artery, it's also a dorsal vein, then goes and joins the same pampiniform plexus. Okay, so whenever, the importance of this is, whenever we suspect varicocele, the chances that they have a venous damage to the penis is also there. So there is leakage of the veins. So usually they complain of some sort of erection problem. That's why I get an erection, but after some time it reduces because the blood leaks out through this channel. And that leakage happens because when it is dilated. The same thing, if you usually do a scan to their scrotum, you will see varicose in there, varicocele. Mechanism of erection, yes, it is the dilatation of the arterioles, and when it dilates, the blood gets accumulated in the sinusoids, and then how it keeps on accumulating, it doesn't get discharges because of the expansion. The subtunical vein plexus is compressed, so there is no leakage happening because of the expansion. So only the blood gets accumulated. That's how it builds on. The erection builds on, and it becomes more and more hard. And many would have noticed when it becomes hard, it becomes even heated up. That's a natural process because more and more blood gets accumulated that. And when it goes to a level where it is very hot and very tight, that is when ejaculation happens. When ejaculation happens, all gets released. The ejaculation is a sympathetic supply. So what happens is it just opens up all the sinusoids suddenly, and all the blood gets leaked out in the veins. Emissary veins gets opened up, and so once the ejaculation happens, they lose their erection. Okay, that's how the mechanism happens. Okay, this is the same what I said. This is pressure because of the smooth muscle contraction, and then when there is opening of the venous channel, the venous outlet gets fully restored. Now, what are the chemical mediators required? Nitric oxide is the main thing which increases the blood flow into the penis, and that's increases the GMP level, and then it causes more erection. Okay, coming to ejaculation mechanism, we are not concerned more of erection, it's into ejaculation. That's why I'm just skipping out very quickly. Ejaculation is more important. Why? Because you have to find where is the problem. Patient can have a retrograde ejaculation, he can have an ejaculation. So there are multiple ejaculatory problems. So you have to understand this. So wherever you are required for fertility aspect, I'm stopping there more. The rest all I'm just brushing up very quickly. In case you require, you let me know more details. Okay. Now, ejaculation happens in 3 phases. The first phase is the emission. So the emission is the passage of the fluid into the posterior urethra. So that happens that's why most of the people with anejaculation also, they say it happens but nothing comes out. Even with retrograde, they say the same thing. It happens means they can make out the passage of the fluid into the posterior urethra. They can feel it. So the first phase happens, that's called emission. But then there is nothing for the next stage, like closure of the bladder neck may not happen. That is when they get retrograde. So the ejaculate goes back into the bladder. So when there is a problem in the second phase, it comes into retrograde ejaculation. Now the third phase is ejaculate into the urethral contents come into the penile urethra, is because of the contracture of the muscles there, bulbo cavernous muscles, which contracts. When that contracts, there is a antegrade propulsion because bladder neck is closed. So the only passage is forward, so it comes. That is the last phase. Now, when there is the first phase happening, it's the emission. Second phase does not happen. That's a retrograde ejaculation. Third phase does not happen. He's not having the muscle contracture happening. Then also it stays within the posterior urethra. Very rare neurological cases. Patients with diabetes, severe diabetes, or had a spinal cord injury, they have They can produce sperm, but they cannot ejaculate because third phase does not happen. So in these cases, in neurological cases, we can't give vibratory therapy also. We have to give electroejaculation, means we have to give a shock treatment, which we give a signal to the plexus, that is hypogastric plexus. We put it through the rectum, almost above the prostate. That will stimulate the hypogastric plexus, and then because of the nerve stimulation, it ejaculates. Okay. These nerve stimulations are pudendal nerves, that is S2, S3, S4. Okay, the nerve connection I'll tell, neurological control I'll tell. Everyone understood this, no? Okay. Now, this also I'll just concise because I don't want you to drag too much and get you confused. It is basically the ejaculation happens via the pudendal nerve, S2, S3, S4. Okay, signal from when you get an ejaculate means there should be a mood developing. So that comes from T12 to L3. That is through the its signal comes through the spinal cord. Okay, you understand that a person, let us say, male is seeing a female, he gets excited. The signal comes to the from the hypothalamus. Okay, that is the where they get that mood, and from there the signal comes through the spinal cord to L12 to L3. These are afferent. Okay, it's coming. The signal is coming from that. Then it goes to the spinal cord centers, and the ejaculation starts with the pudendal nerve, that is S2, S3, S4. Okay, from there the signal goes via the hypogastric nerve, and that helps in contraction of the epididymis, vas, prostate, all internal sphincter, bulbo, cavernosus, all this contracts, and that's how you get a ejaculate. Okay, so ejaculation happens via hypogastric nerve. Okay, stimulation happens via pudendal nerve. Okay, this is more of a theoretical, but what is the clinical implications? I'll tell you now. Now there is a person who is unable to ejaculate. Neurologically, everything is normal. Let us say you are touching, his afferent is normal, means you press his glands, then he will say he gets the ejaculation, he gets the stimulus. That means his afferent nerves are normal. Then what you can do? You can give a vibratory therapy. Okay, because when you stimulate the glands, means glands is supplied by T12 to L3. So that afferent works. So you can give a vibratory therapy. If you touch a glands and he does not feel anything, means there is a neurological defect, then vibratory therapy will not work. Then you have to go for an electroejaculation. Okay, that's why the neurological examination is very important. Okay, it's to differentiate in the case of an ejaculation what type of treatment you give. Okay, understood, no? An ejaculation where the sperms are there and he is unable to ejaculate. He is unable to ejaculate means there are only two phases which is having problem. Phase 2 means he is getting a retrograde ejaculation. Phase 3 means an ejaculation. Now, how to find which is retrograde, which is problem with the phase 2 or phase 3 is there are tests. There are tests which will tell you about retrograde ejaculation. I have a class, but I will still tell now why, because it is relevant here. How to do is, first of all, let him ejaculate. Give him 2 containers. Let him ejaculate, and post ejaculation, let him give the urine sample. Okay, it should be post ejaculate, and don't ask him to give start the ejaculate with full bladder or anything like that when his bladder is full, because he will give 1 liter of urine, and where you will search the sperm in 1 liter? It's very difficult. Urine is such a huge thing, and sperms are not even seen in eyes. So you always say, see, you are diagnosing retrograde ejaculation. If the bladder is full, you are not diagnosing. Retrograde will not happen. So whenever you are diagnosing, ask him to do the opposite. That means let him empty the bladder. Let the sperm go into the bladder only. Then only we'll identify. So ask him to empty the bladder. drink 1 or 2 glasses of water, then ask him to collect and ejaculate to document how much is coming forward. Then ask him, by that time he does some amount of urine, 10 ml, 20 ml will be collected. Then you ask him to collect the urine. So it will not be huge, it will be 10 ml. Then they can search in that. Okay. So that is how you diagnose a case of retrograde ejaculation. Treatment for that is different. You go agonist, alpha agonist you can give, but I will come to the treatment aspect later on. Diagnosis is very important so that you can concentrate on that. Now that is retrograde. Now coming to the anejaculation. In anejaculation, that is the phase 3. That is, he's not ejaculating. What could be the thing? One is a neurological problem. His afferent may not be working. Second, efferent. His muscle may not be contracting. He may be getting the sensation, but contraction is not happening. So what to do in each cases? Now, when his afferent itself is having a problem, then you have to do this is electroejaculation. So that because of the electrical stimulation, he will ejaculate out because the efferent is there. When efferent itself is at problem, is unable to push, what can be done? Just think. Muscle is not contracting.
Electroejaculation
Will not work. Efferent is problem, not the afferent. I know, a little difficult for you to think. It's simple. Thing is, you convert this efferent problem into a retrograde ejaculation. Okay, put a catheter. Okay, let the sperm go into the bladder, and then you catheterize and remove. Anyway, he is not going to contract. The sperm will never come forward, but it can go backward. The sphincter may be holding. So that is when I give alpha antagonist, alpha blockers I give. Okay, and convert that antegrade into a retrograde ejaculation. So if it doesn't come forward, let it go back, and then I catheterize and remove all the sperm. You understood? It's just logical. Okay, electroejaculation will not work. Okay, then you may have to go for muscle building, then contracture of the muscle, giving an electrode directly to muscle. All this is not possible in penis, being a small area. So maybe theoretically, but not practically possible. So simple thing. I'm just converting it. I'm relaxing the sphincter, seeing the sperm goes into the bladder, and I'm put a catheter, immediately remove all the sperms. Okay, this is one condition where we give a retrograde, we make a retrograde ejaculation. Now there are certain things, few people, it is called situational anejaculation. Means they say at home I am able to ejaculate, here I am not able to ejaculate. So here where is the problem? Afferent is normal, efferent also is normal. The problem is with the higher mental function. So and you can't control his higher mental function, can you? Nobody can control. So here we use a vibratory method. So because the stimulation at the spinal cord level happens through T3 to L4, which comes from the higher mental function. You can also stimulate its pudendal nerve. So by stimulating the glands. So that's how the vibratory therapy works. Okay. So you should know in what type of anejaculation, divide them into these three, that is situational anejaculation or a neurological anejaculation, that is a complete anejaculation, and where is the problem, and accordingly we treat them. Okay. This is about the ejaculation. This also we already sorry. Now related to fertility and sterility. Now it's just a thing that what are the chances of a male factor problem and the female factor problem, because it is always 50-50. So we have to understand that both can contribute to infertility, and we have very less where both are fertile chances. That too in today. Slowly we are seeing a rise in the male problems of reproductive system. The reason being maybe your more stressful life or exposure to the environmental things or even radiations. And testis being an exposed organ, it gets easily uh, more, can be even traumatized, because any mechanical injury can also cause. So many things are there. So why we need an evaluation is, even if you get, let us say, yes, few sperms, let us say you're planning for an IVF, you have 1 million sperms in your semen analysis. Does that mean that is ready for IVF? IVF, you need 1 sperms. 10x, you need 10 sperms. You have 1 million sperms. Do you need to evaluate such cases, or can you bypass the evaluation? You got my question? Patient is having 1 million sperms, and you have planned for IVF, whatever. Let us say, due to female factor, you have identified that she will require IVF, and for IVF you don't need much sperms, so he's having 1 million sperm. Is it enough, or do we need to evaluate? Is the question. Why? Huh?
We should see for the morphology.
Let us say morphology is normal. Chromosomal, then they will not have any sperm. 1 million sperm is there. Infection pulses is not there.
Motility.
Motility is normal. Highly motile sperms.
Sometimes it can vary. That's why we need to evaluate. So sometimes it can become still less.
No. On that day you have got, you are planning quickly. It will not change within a month. The answer for this is no. Yes, it can be anti-sperm antibodies, can be there, cannot be there. How will it change your? Let us say antibodies are there. What will you do? Still IVF, because anyway you are going to process it. So, why we need to evaluate is simple, basic thing. Why is it 1 million? Why not like 20 millions like normal? He may be having a normal morphology, he may be having a normal motility, but why is his count decreased? First question. Why is that 1 million? So there must be something, isn't it? There is something, there is some problem. That is why his count has gone down to 1 million. If you don't evaluate that problem, let us say this is enough for reproduction, can that go into the progeny also? The same baby will again suffer. One. Second, chances of abortions are more because there is a defect within this. It's after all a defective semen, though it is okay in the morphology, still the parameters are not totally normal. So when there is a defective semen you are using, there will be a defective embryos. Chances of your success rate is down. Chances of carrying these defects are also there. So we evaluate more is to give the best sperm. It's not about the number 1 million, 10 million, whatever it may be. But we evaluate so that when we give the sperm, let us say if it is 1-2 sperm also, let that be the best sperm. Okay. So we shouldn't go behind the numbers. Okay. We should go behind the quality of those sperms. Okay. So evaluation is to find out where is the defect, what is it causing, why it has happened. Let us say he has a varicocele. Let us say he has a varicocele, and that has caused it. Let us treat it. Let us improvise that semen parameters, and then after improvising, then you use that sperm. Let the count maybe still a 1 million, but when you treat, let us say I give some medical treatment for the varicocele, the sperms which come out will have a higher chances that it will fertilize it, because you have tackled some problem and you have done some remedy. So the reason why we evaluate is to get a better outcome, better success rate. It's not just to find out or to categorize. It's the overall fertility. It's the embryo will be higher quality, and also your success rate will be high. So we need to evaluate all sorts of, whether it is male infertility, female, we have to evaluate. I know for IVF I need sperm, but the chances that we convert this IVF to IUI is more. We found a varicocele, we treat it. Who knows that 1 million will become 10 millions, and your management may change. Then you may say, okay, IUI is possible. I mean, it's an added advantage. Okay. So we need to evaluate, and then it improves. That's what I have written here. Actually, nobody has read the slides. It increases the chance naturally. It improves the IVF success rate. Okay, and also underlying health problems can be found out. Genetic risk for the offspring can be. Let us say it is having CBABD in azoospermia. We diagnose so that we can counsel them that the chances of CBABD going into the progeny also is there. If it is a male child, then you can always say that, yes, I had told you, no, male child can still carry. If it's a female child, it may not carry, but the female child can be a carrier for the next. Okay, all this needs to be told. Oh, too much is there. Because I don't want to go slowly, we are going into pathology, so I'm just skipping all this. Okay. See, varicocele will cause all these ultrastructural defects, DNA problems, metabolites, hypogonadism, reduction in testosterone, increase of all this. I'll come to varicocele topic, so I'll not go into all this in detail. Okay. This is all related to varicocele only, so I'll not go into this. Okay, any doubts now? I have just I did not go through like a textbook wise. I have put into clinical picture which are focusing on the anatomy and the physiology aspect only. Now in further classes, when we take up the clinical aspect, no, then you will know, understand. When I told all this, anatomy will come there. How we think, where is the obstruction? When we talk about the obstruction, where is the obstruction and what has to be done, and how to know that prognosis is good with inhibin level. Okay, so and correlation of that to the anatomy, all this thing can be. And when we operate, let us go for PISA or TISA, or you want to go for micro TISA, all this we can diagnose and prognosticate. Okay.